The Arindis asteroid mining outpost was a defiant gash torn into the lifeless husk of a rock, its obsidian tunnels aglow with the stubborn orange flicker of sodium lamps that waged a ceaseless war against the fractured Tarsus Veil Nebula's oppressive gloom, a light that danced with every breath. Dust, silicate shards glinting like shattered dreams under the dim glow, rusted metal flecks from worn drills scattered like confetti, coated every surface, the air a sharp cocktail of ozone that stung the nose, sweat that marked their effort, and the rhythmic clang of hammers that rang like a heartbeat, a symphony of 32 souls who refused to bow to the corporate abandonment that had severed their lifeline 3 months ago with a cold, silent cut. The outpost's hull, a patchwork of scavenged plates riveted with care and exposed conduits snaking like veins across a weathered body, gleamed faintly against the nebula's swirling purples and blacks, its fractures leaking starlight like wounds from a battle still raging, a testament to their unyielding spirit that refused to fade. Miners with cracked helmets swung picks with fierce grins that split their dust-caked faces, their muscles straining against the weight of the rock. Techs with oil-streaked faces patched wires with calloused hands that trembled with exhaustion, their chants of "We hold" echoing through the tunnels like a war drum that shook the dust from the walls, turning isolation into a fortress of will forged in sweat. The nebula pulsed overhead, a bruised sprawl of light, purples bleeding into blacks like a wound. In the sky, its fractures a jagged mirror to their resolve, a challenge they met with laughter that bounced off the stone, grit that lined their throats, and a defiance that sang in every strike of metal on rock. Torin Vex, the lead engineer, was a man forged in the crucible of resolve, his calloused hands steady despite the jagged scars tracing his palms like rivers from a decade-old ventilation collapse he'd battled to seal amid smoke that choked his lungs and screams that haunted his sleep, losing his brother Jace but saving the rest with a desperation that still lingered in his bones. At 42, his graying hair was tied back with a frayed band stained with grease and sweat from days without rest, his hazel eyes blazing with a fire that scorched doubt to ash with every glance, his voice a gravelly roar that rallied the outpost from the depths of despair with a power that lifted spirits like a dawn breaking. His limp, a souvenir from that day when a beam crushed his leg in a shower of sparks that burned his skin, swung with pride as he led with bold certainty, his past a forge for their defiance, a story told in every limping step that echoed through the tunnels. "We're not done," he'd bellow, his voice bouncing off the walls like a battle cry that stirred the air, and the crew would roar back, their trust a shield against the corporate silence that had cut their lifeline, their hope a flame he stoked with every repair, every patched conduit, every defiant laugh that rang true. The Commons was a cavernous heart etched with tally marks counting days survived like medals of honor and bawdy jokes scrawled in haste, dust's our treasure, lads. Its viewport a cracked portal framing the nebula's fractured glow, a reminder of the void they defied with every ragged breath. Rin, the comms officer, perched on a crate with a grace that belied the tension, her fingers drumming a jaunty rhythm that filled the air with life, her dark eyes twinkling with mischief at 28, her quick wit a spark that ignited the crew's spirits with every quip. Soren, the security chief, lounged against a wall with a pulse rifle slung over his broad shoulder, his grin flashing like a beacon as he tossed a quip, "Vex, you weld slower than a drunk slug on holiday crawling through mud." Drawing hoots and laughter from the miners that echoed like thunder through the space. Mara, the geologist, sketched maps with a chuckle that softened her lined face, her notebook a tapestry of hope amid depleted veins, her voice light as she traced lines of survival with a stylus that danced like a pen on paper. The crew's banter was a defiant hum, miners wagering dust piles with raucous bets that shook the crates, tech-swapping stories of past hauls with exaggerated gestures that filled the room with life, turning hardship into a game. Their humor a weapon that sliced through the dark with a blade of joy. "Filters still kicking, boss?" Rin called, lobbing a ration bar with a wink that sparkled in the dim light, her grin wide and infectious like a sunrise. Torin snatched it midair with a flourish, smirking as he tore it open, the foil crinkling like a victory flag waving in the wind. "Barely," he said, popping a bite with a theatrical chew that drew laughs. "Ozone's a beast with claws, but we'll wrestle it to the ground and make it sing a tune. Who's with me?" A cheer erupted, Soren's laugh booming like thunder rolling through the cavern, Mara raising her stylus like a banner held high against the stars, the miners pounding fists on crates with a rhythm that shook the floor and sent dust spiraling. The Arindis was their stronghold, its failures a gauntlet they'd conquer with sweat and steel, rescue a distant dream they'd outlast with sheer will, their voices a chorus that defied the silence of the void with a harmony that lifted the soul. The air thrummed with their energy, the nebula's pulse. A silent witness to their unbreakable spirit that refused to bend. At 0200 hours, a tremor rocked the outpost, a pulse, not a collapse, vibrating through Torin's bones like a gauntlet thrown by the void itself, a challenge that set his blood aflame with a warrior's thrill. He was in the maintenance bay, welding a conduit, sparks dancing like fireflies in the dim light that flickered with the tremor, the air thick with the acrid bite of molten metal and the hum of his tools that sang a song of defiance. Consoles flared with erratic data, spiking like a heartbeat then flatlining into silence that pressed against his ears, lights dimming to a faint, stuttering pulse that cast long shadows across the walls like specters. The comms hummed with static, a crackle that faded into a void where voices should be, leaving an eerie quiet that chilled the air. Torin tapped his earpiece, his voice a steady command cutting through the tension like a blade sharpened on stone. "Rin, what's that?" he asked, his tone sharp, his hands pausing mid-weld as the sparks died. Her reply crackled through the static, tense and clipped with urgency. Sensors caught a signal, close, no pattern. "Not rockfall, Torin. Something's out there, moving, alive." He strode to the control hub, boots crunching dust with each determined step that echoed in the silence, the hum of the outpost faltering like a heartbeat slowing under strain, a rhythm that faltered. The crew was alert, miners gripping drills like swords with white-knuckled fists that trembled with anticipation, techs eyeing dead screens with furrowed brows and muttered curses that filled the air, Mara pausing mid-sketch, her notebook trembling in her hands as if the lines might break under the weight. Rin stood at the main console, her fingers shaking as she adjusted dials with a focus born of fear, Soren beside her, rifle ready, his grin replaced by a hard line etched deep with resolve. The air grew thick, charged with an anticipation that crackled like static, a tension that hung like a storm. "Show me," Torin said, his voice a ring of steel that steadied the room, a command that cut through the haze. Rin pointed to a grainy feed flickering on the screen, her breath shallow and quick with each exhale. Beyond the nebula's glow, a shadow loomed, a formless mass, shifting like smoke caught in a breeze that twisted the light, its edges bleeding into the void. Pulsing with a faint, eerie light that made the eyes ache to follow, a wrongness that twisted the gut with dread. No heat signature, no mass, just presence, alive and alien, warping the nebula's purples into a sickly green swirl that pulsed in time with the tremor, a dance of dread that chilled the blood. "What the hell is that?" Soren muttered, his rifle steadying, his voice low, the humor drained from his face, replaced by a grim resolve that hardened his jaw. Torrens' jaw tightened, his scars tingling with a thrill that surged through his veins like a river breaking its banks, his heart pounding. With the rush of a fight he'd been born to win, a battle cry in his soul. "Get sensors up," he said, his voice a challenge thrown into the dark, a dare to the shadow beyond that loomed like a threat. "We face it head-on, no running, no backing down, no surrender." The crew scrambled, hands sure and swift, patching systems with a fervor born of defiance, their cheers turning to a focused hum as they worked with a unity that shook the dust from the walls, a symphony of effort. Torrens stood by the console, eyes locked on the shadow, its pulse a dare that fueled his fire, the air thick with the promise of a battle they'd win, his resolve a flame ready to burn. Brighter than the nebula itself, a beacon for his crew to follow into the fray. By the next cycle, marked by the nebula's slow, bruised pulse, a heartbeat of light against the endless dark that stretched beyond their sight, the crew had coaxed the sensors back online, their hands steady with the confidence of warriors forged in the crucible, their curses a defiant beat in the dust-choked tunnels that reverberated with their unyielding will, a rhythm that shook the stone. The shadow drew closer, its formless mass coiling like a living mist caught in an unseen wind that twisted the air, pulsing with a rhythm that synced with the outpost's groan, with the thud of their boots against the floor, with the steady thrum of their spirits unbroken by the void. It gave no readings, no heat to warm their hands, no mass to anchor their scans, just a presence that twisted the nebulas purples into sickly greens that stung the eyes, its light a cold flicker that left a pressure behind the skull, a hum that made the air feel alive, wrong, a riddle wrapped in a wonder that defied comprehension and invited awe. Scans spat static like a mocking laugh or returned voids that swallowed their efforts, as if the shadow taunted their tools with a silent challenge, its existence a puzzle they'd unravel with their hands and hearts, a mystery to conquer. Torren led a team to the observation hub, a dome of cracked quartz overlooking the nebula, its surface dusted with silicate grit that caught the light like diamonds, warping through its fractures to paint their faces in bruised shades of purple and green, a canvas of their defiance against the dark. Rin followed, her drumming a nervous tap that quickened with each step, her dark eyes sharp with a mix of fear that tightened her brow and a curiosity that burned bright, her breath a cloud that hung in the cold air. Soren gripped his rifle, his grin replaced by a tense jaw that clenched with every pulse of the shadow, his broad frame a wall of readiness, his breath uneven with the weight of the unknown that pressed against his chest. Mara clutched her notebook, her sketches quickening into frantic lines that danced across the page like a storm, her voice a murmur of awe as she traced the shadow's edges with a reverence that stilled the air, a wonder that softened her voice. The crew pressed close, their breath fogging the glass in rhythmic clouds that merged into a mist, their murmurs a hum of anticipation that filled the dome with a life that defied the void, a pulse of hope. The shadow pulsed beyond, its coils shifting like a dancer's veil in a cosmic ballet, its light a sickly glow that drew gasps, alive and watching with an otherworldly wonder that made the hair on their necks stand, a presence that spoke of something vast and ancient. "It's alive," Mara breathed, her pencil pausing mid-stroke, her eyes wide with a childlike awe that softened her face like a child's first snow. "Like it's studying us, learning our fire, our spirit, our very souls." Soren barked a laugh, rough but warm, breaking the tension like a crack of thunder that rolled through the dome and shook the quartz. "Better than dust, eh? Maybe it'll mine for us, save us the trouble and bring us a feast to share." The crew chuckled, the sound bouncing off the walls, easing the weight, their humor a shield against the alien gaze, a defiance that rang true and lifted their spirits. The air grew heavy, the outpost's hum faltering into a groan that vibrated through their chests, a prelude to something vast and unknowable that loomed on the horizon. Then, a presence brushed them, a whisper, not sound but feeling, vibrating in their skulls. Soft and insistent, a caress of intent that wrapped around their minds like a warm embrace. Images flared in their minds with a vividness that stole their breath and quickened their pulses, a warm void pulsing with golden light that bathed their skin, hands reaching in welcome with fingers that glowed like stars, a chorus promising strength and unity that swelled their hearts with a joy they hadn't known since the abandonment. The whisper left a thrill, a pull that made Torrens' pulse race with pride, his chest swelling with a fire rekindled, a wonder that lifted his spirit like a bird taking flight. He saw Jace, grinning, whole, clapping his shoulder with a brother's pride that warmed his heart, his form bathed in a golden glow that lit the dark, a vision of reunion that made Torrens' eyes sting with unshed tears that he blinked away. He grinned back, the image fading like a dream caught in the dawn, but the whisper lingered, a spark in his blood, a wonder he welcomed as a gift from the void. That strengthened them. "What's it doing?" Rin asked, her tap quickening to a frantic beat that matched her racing heart, her eyes gleaming with a mix of fear. That tightened her lips in a hope that flickered like a candle in the wind. Torrens shrugged, his voice light with excitement, a laugh bubbling up from his chest like a spring breaking through stone. "Testing us. Maybe. Let's show it what we're made of, fire and steel, heart and soul, a blaze that'll light the void." The crew scattered to their posts, their movements a dance of purpose that filled the tunnels with a rhythm that pulsed with life, but the Arindis felt alive, its walls thrumming with a new energy, the shadow's presence a catalyst that stoked their defiance like a bellows on a forge. By night cycle, the visions grew, vivid, strange, a wonder unfolding like a gift from the void that wrapped them in warmth. Rin saw her father juggling tools with a laugh that echoed in her ears like a melody, promising aid with a wink that warmed her soul and brought a smile to her lips, her fingers still as she relived the moment with a quiet joy. Mara sketched a nebula dance, her voice humming a tune that wove through the tunnels like a thread, her face alight with a peace she hadn't known since the silence began, her pencil a wand of creation that traced the stars. Soren dreamed of a rifle that sang victory with a tune that lifted his spirits, chuckling awake with a grin that split his face, sharing the tale with a miner who roared with laughter that shook the walls and filled the air with sound. Others hooped, seeing lost friends wielding picks with strength renewed, a vigor they craved with every swing, their defiance fueling the outpost's pulse with a rhythm of hope that drowned the silence and lifted their hearts. Torrens stayed awake, sketching the shadow's coils by the dim glow of his headlamp that flickered with each breath, their beauty a wonder that filled him with awe, a puzzle to solve with his hands and mind that danced with possibility. He trusted the whispers promise, its warmth a boon to their fight, a gift that promised to lift them higher than the corporate chains that bound them. In the maintenance bay, he worked, the air dusty with silicate that clung to his skin like a second coat, his tools singing in his hands as he repaired a conduit, the metal bending to his will with a groan that echoed his effort. The whisper grew, Jace's grin returning, whole. Proud, a beacon of strength that steadied his hands, his voice a murmur of encouragement that filled the space with hope. His scars tingled, his resolve flaring brighter, a fire stoked by the shadow's wonder, a challenge he'd turn into a triumph that would echo through the ages. Rin found him at 0300, her face lit with hope that glowed in the dim light, her voice a whisper of excitement that trembled with possibility and promise. "It's a gift, Torren." Jace agrees, "It's our strength, our future, a light to guide us through the dark and beyond." He nodded, hands deep in conduits, a laugh escaping as he tightened a bolt with a satisfying click that rang like a bell. "Feels right. Let's use it to burn brighter than the stars, to light a path for all. Rin grinned, her steps light as she left, the tunnel swallowing her form in the dim light that flickered with her departure. Torin worked on, the whisper a song in his ears, Jace's presence a fire stoking their defiance, the shadows wonder a challenge they'd turn into a victory that would resonate through the void with a power unmatched. On the fourth day, the shadow spoke, not with words that could be written on paper or etched in stone, but with intent, a whisper, weaving through their minds like a thread of cold steel forged in the depths, clear and unyielding, a voice that carried the weight of eons and the hunger of a void. It was the collective, a weave of shadows older than the nebula itself, a chorus of lost thoughts seeking renewal through the blazing fire of human will that burned in their chests, their existence a hunger cloaked in wonder that promised strength. Their offer chilled the air, a promise that hung heavy like a storm cloud ready to break. Join them, become their strength, their endless dark that stretched beyond the stars, a unity to awaken their slumbering vastness that dreamed in silence. No weakness to weigh them down, no loss to haunt their nights, only power to rival the cosmos and light the void with their glory. The Arindis would merge, its crew woven into the collective, their resolve a note in its song, a flame to banish their silence and fill their emptiness. The co-white heavy checkmark mons filled with a buzz of purpose that hummed like a living thing, faces alight with the glow of possibility that painted their features, the air thick with dust that danced in the light and the electric hum of excitement that crackled like static before a storm. Rin stood by a crate, her hands still with a reverence that stilled the room, her eyes bright with the vision of her father's return, his laugh a memory that warmed her chest like a hearth, her voice firm with conviction that rang like a bell through the haze. "My father's back," she said, her words cutting through the murmur like a knife sharpened on stone. "He says we'll be unstoppable, a force beyond survival. It's our triumph, Torin, our legacy that will outlast the void and echo through the stars." Soren slammed his rifle butt down, the crack echoing off the walls like a gunshot that silenced the hum, his laugh gone, his face hardening into a mask of distrust that darkened his features like a shadow. "More? They're taking our souls, Vex. For what? A cage to feed on our fire, to drain us dry until we're husks?" Mara traced a spiral in her notebook, her voice calm with a wonder tinged with resignation that softened her tone, her fingers steady as she spoke with a quiet strength. "We're failing, radiation burns our lungs with every ragged breath that scratches our throats, airs thinning like a ghost slipping away into the dark. This could save us, make us more than we are, a bridge to something vast that we can't yet see or touch." Voices clashed in a storm of emotion that shook the room with a fury, hope lifting miners' picks with renewed vigor that sent sparks flying, fear gripping Tech's tools with white-knuckled fists that trembled with doubt, defiance stealing Soren's grip on his rifle with a glare that could cut steel. Rin's group swelled, their eyes gleaming with visions of strength that painted their faces with light, their chants a hymn to the future that rose like a tide and filled the air with sound. Soren shrank, bracing with weapons raised like a barricade, their murmurs a growl of resistance that rumbled like distant thunder and shook the floor. Torin stood tall at the center, the collective's offer a thrill coursing through him like a river breaking its banks, no more Jace's loss to haunt his nights with gasps that echoed, no limp to slow his stride with pain that lingered, just power to lead them to glory that would echo through the stars and beyond. But a flicker nagged at the edge of his mind, a shadow within the light that darkened his thoughts. A miner's mutter, "They feed on will," a hint of wrongness that made his scars itch with unease, a crack in the vision's perfection that widened with each pulse and chilled his blood. He slipped to the maintenance bay, the air sharp with dust that stung his eyes and coated his lungs, pulling logs with hands that trembled slightly with the weight of thought, his mind racing to piece the puzzle together like a map in the dark. The shadows' pulses synced with their brainwaves, spiking with Rin's joy that lit her face like a beacon, Soren's anger that darkened his brow with a storm. Torin's resolve that burned in his chest like a forge, amplifying their fire like fuel for a hunger that grew with each beat, a consumption hidden in the wonder that promised peace. Doubt crept in, cold and sharp, a blade against the warmth that had filled him, as he traced the data, energy drains matching their emotional peaks, a pattern of theft that chilled his blood and froze his hands. The collective whispered, "You are strong. We are one. Join, and your fire will light our void, your will our salvation, your strength our rebirth." Torin returned to the commons, the crew split like a fractured rock under pressure that threatened to shatter, Rin's faction chanting their hymn with voices that soared to the rafters, Soren's group bracing for war with rifles that gleamed in the dim light. He faced Rin, his voice steady but laced with a question that hung heavy like a storm cloud ready to burst. "What if they're draining us? Our will? Feeding their hunger, not ours, a theft cloaked in promise that will leave us empty?" Her eyes narrowed, shock fading to a defiant glare that burned with conviction, her voice rising like a challenge that cut the air. "You're wrong, Torin. You're weak now, doubting the strength we've been given, the gift my father promised with his own voice. This is our destiny, our triumph." "Maybe," he said, his scars cooling as doubt took root like ice in his veins, his voice firming with a resolve reborn from the ashes of his certainty. "But I'd break before I let them take what's mine, before I let them steal our fire and leave us shadows." Silence fell, a line drawn in the dust that settled like a shroud over the room, the crew's eyes fixed on him with a mix of hope that flickered and fear that darkened, the whisper pressing against his skull with a pressure that threatened to crack his resolve, Torin's choice a spark teetering on the edge of a chasm, the weight of their future balanced on his trembling hands that clenched into fists. Mutiny ignited like a flare tearing through the dark, a blaze of wills clashing with a fury that shook the Arindis to its very foundations, a battle cry that echoed through the stone. Rin's faction seized the comm's hub, their voices a hymn rising to the stars with a fervor that vibrated the walls and sent dust spiraling, signaling the collective with a unity that pulsed like a heartbeat, their strength a beacon of triumph that glowed in the dim light. Soren's group armed the core, ready to sabotage with a defiance that crackled in the air like lightning splitting the sky, their rifles a wall against the shadow that loomed beyond with a threat unspoken. Torin chose alone in the power bay, the air thick with dust that choked his breath and the bitter tang of scorched metal that coated his throat like ash, the core's hum a fading heartbeat that echoed his own faltering pulse, a rhythm that slowed. The core was a chaotic nest of coils, dust-choked and pulsing with radiation that seared his skin with every touch, its surface a map of their desperation etched in grime and sweat, a monument to their struggle that stood like a sentinel. Torin could overload it, send a pulse to shatter the collective, break its whisper and free their minds from its grasp that tightened like a vice. Or end them all in a blaze of defiance that would light the void with their sacrifice, a pyre to mark their stand. Not duty that bound him, not survival that drove him, but a raw, personal fire burned in his chest, the collective strength a lie that mocked his resolve, his will his own to wield, now shadowed by the doubt that gnawed at his soul like a beast with teeth of ice. He saw Jace's grin fade, a vision cracking like glass under pressure that splintered his heart, Rin's faction faltering as their chants grew hollow and lost their rhythm, the tunnels groaning under the strain of their division that threatened to tear them apart. He worked with a fury born of breaking, rerouting power through trembling hands that bled onto the controls, the blood mixing with dust in a grim paste that stained the metal, the core roaring to life with a scream that filled the bay and shook the walls, screens flashing, critical failure, overload imminent, a countdown to oblivion that ticked in his ears. The collective whispered, "Why fight? You are ours, your fire ours to claim, your will our feast to devour." Jace's image shattered into fragments that cut like shards of glass, piercing his mind with pain. Rin's voice broke into sobs that echoed through the hub like a lament. Soren's group froze as tunnels collapsed in a cascade of dust and stone that buried their hopes, lights exploding in sparks that rained like tears from a broken sky and lit the dark with fleeting fire. Torrin staggered, burned searing his arms and chest with a pain that stole his breath and blurred his vision, his limp agony that buckled his knee and sent him crashing against the wall with a thud, blood filling his mouth with a copper tang that choked his cries and silenced his roar, his resolve breaking under the weight of loss that crushed his spirit into dust. The shadow flickered, its whisper silenced like a cord cut short by a blade, Rin collapsing to her knees in the hub with tears streaking her dust-caked face like rivers, Soren dropping his rifle with a clatter that rang in the silence like a bell, Mara staring into the dark with eyes wide and empty, her notebook slipping from her hands to fall with a soft thud. Torrin slumped against a wall, Burns raw and weeping with a heat that seared his soul and marked his skin, the Arindus crumbling around him with a groan that mimicked his own despair, air thin and bitter with the scent of ruin that filled his lungs and weighed his chest. His crew lived, scattered and shaken, their voices a distant murmur that faded into the dust, but his fire was ash, his defiance a hollow echo that reverberated in the silence, the cost of his choice a scar that burned deeper than his flesh, a weight that crushed his spirit into a void where hope had once burned. The collective didn't retaliate, its shadow pulsing once like a dying breath caught in the throat before dissolving into the nebula's steady glow, its voice a fading echo that lingered in the silence like a ghost drifting through the dark. We sought your fire to rise from our slumber, to break our endless night with your light. You left us cold, a void unlit, a silence unbroken by our song. A vision flared in Torrin's mind with a clarity that pierced his pain like a spear, a vast emptiness scarred with a dark fracture that split the dark like a wound, his pulse a mark carved into their silence, a defiance that starved their hunger and left them adrift in their own void. They'd fed on human will to awaken from their eons-long sleep, their wonder a mask for a consumption that devoured their spirits, his breaking of their hold a scar they'd carry into oblivion, their chorus silenced by the strength he'd denied them with his stand. The Arindus was a ruin, its tunnels dark and choked with dust settling like a shroud over their struggle, the air thin and bitter with the aftermath that clung to their skin like a second coat, a reminder of their fight. Rin patched wires with trembling hands that steadied with each connection that sparked to life, her eyes clearing as she whispered to herself a mantra of survival that echoed in the silence. A quiet strength returning to her frame like a dawn breaking over the horizon, Soren cleared debris with a methodical pace that spoke of purpose renewed, his rifle sheathed at his side like a relic, his face set with a new resolve that carved lines of endurance into his skin. A map of their journey. Mara sketched, her notebook open to a map of survival etched in shaky lines that grew firm with each stroke. Her voice a soft hum that steadied the silence and wove a thread of hope through the dark, a song of resilience. They survived, hope a flicker in the wreckage, a light born from the ashes that glowed with a promise of renewal that lit their path. Torrin sat in the observation hub, the cracked quartz cold against his burns that throbbed with every breath that rasped in his chest. The nebulas light a silent witness to their ordeal, its purples and blacks a canvas of their FGHT that stretched into the infinite with a beauty that humbled. Rin approached, her steps hesitant but FRM with a resolve that mirrored his own, her voice soft yet carrying a weight of truth that anchored him like a lifeline. We're still here, Torrin. We're enough, even broken, even scarred with the marks of our fall. We've won something that can't be taken. He traced a scar with a finger that shook with the memory of pain that lingered like a ghost, Jace's memory a whisper in the dark that lingered like a promise of better days, his limp a weight he'd carry as a reminder of his fall, his burns a testament to the price he'd paid. With every drop of blood. The void held silent, but its echoes carried our resolve, he said, a quiet FRE reigniting in his chest, a resolve. Reborn from the embers of his breaking, a light that glowed with the crew's endurance and lit the path ahead with a hope that burned anew. In the void, the Arindisa survivors stood, there will a beacon that pierced the dark with a radiance unmatched, a FRE that burned anew. Against the endless night, a light the collective could never claim, a legacy forged in the shadows of their resolve that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Join the journey, stay human, subscribe.